For sale, baby shoes never worn. This 6-word story is often attributed to Ernest Hemingway. It was debatable whether or not the famous American author actually penned this short and sad tale. Despite this, it serves as an excellent example of how much meaning a writer can pack into one line. A short story consists of a lot of meaty narrative skillfully stuffed in a few pages. Short stories must establish characters, setting, and conflict in a much shorter span than a novel, yet oftentimes, short stories can be just as rich as longer works, full of meaning and creative expression. Our 6 authors this week come from different time periods and cultures, and their stories present women from different walks of life in unique situations. All express different facets of the female experience in powerful prose. So join me as we dive into the short story version of these 6 authors' biographical narratives. Charlotte Perkins Gilman was born in 1860 and died in 1935. She was born in Hartford, Connecticut, but grew up in Providence, Rhode Island. Her father moved out in the family when she was very young, which left her mother, and her brother in relative poverty for most of her childhood. Her mother was not the most affectionate and told Charlotte not to make friends or read fiction, as she would be burned by making attachments. She went to design school and later supported herself through art and teaching, though she didn't really care much for being an instructor. Later in her life, she married artist Charles Walter Stetson, and they had a daughter named Catherine, but after giving birth to Catherine, Charlotte did suffer from postpartum depression. At the time, a famous doctor, Silas Weir Mitchell, recommended the rest cure for her, which consists of the following: 1. Bed rest. 2. Isolation from family. 3. Overfeeding to increase fat volume. 4. Massage and occasional use of electricity on the muscles. And to begin with, the patient could not even leave her bed, read, write, sew, talk, or feed herself, according to one source. And as we will see in the yellow wallpaper, this was not the most effective treatment. Charlotte and Charles divorced 10 years later, which is very rare for the time. She moved to California and became very active in social reform movements, including women's rights. Like Woolf, she strongly believed in economic independence for women. She later married her first cousin, George Houghton Gilman. It was apparently an unhappy marriage, but they did stay together until he died. In 1932, she developed breast cancer, which ended up being inoperable, and since she believed in euthanasia for those who were terminally ill, she committed suicide in 1935. Our next author, Kate Chopin, was born in 1851 and died in 1904. And growing up, Kate was raised by a widowed great-grandmother, grandmother, and mother, so she was in a very woman-heavy household. Kate's father died in a horrific train accident when she was still a child. She later married Oscar Chopin in 1870 at the age of 18, leaving her home of St. Louis, Missouri, for New Orleans. And Oscar apparently was a very good husband. They had a very good relationship, and he gave his wife a lot of independence and was very kind. Chopin did have 6 children before the age of 30. Business failed as a result of poor cotton crops in 1880, so he had to move his family to Cloyderville in Natchitoches Parish, Louisiana, where he ran a general store and several small plantations. Sadly, though, Oscar died in 1882 of swamp fever, and Kate actually ran his businesses for a few years, but eventually moved back to her mother's home in St. Louis. Her mother then died shortly thereafter, leaving Chopin widowed with 6 children and no mother for support. She started writing in 1887 as a means to support her family and was pretty successful at it. Her first short stories were very popular. As she began to write, though, more emboldened characters, there was a decline in her popularity. Solomon explains that editors told Chopin they would publish her work if she would tone down the women she wrote about. The Awakening, her only novel, received much critical backlash, and after that she did not write much until she died of a brain hemorrhage in 1904. Our next author, Jamaica Kincaid, was born in 1949 and is still alive today. She was born Elaine Potter Richardson in Antigua in the Caribbean. Since Antigua was a British colony at the time, she received a Western education and was very close to her mother until her mother gave birth to 3 sons in a short period of time, which led her mother to kind of neglect Kincaid in favor of her sons. At the age of 17, she moved to New York and worked as an au pair to earn money for her family, but ended up refusing to send it home as she felt her interests in life were being undervalued in comparison to her brother's. She eventually became a writer for The New Yorker, and she actually took the name Jamaica Kincaid to give an anonymity to her writing. She now teaches at Harvard and lives in Vermont with her husband and 2 children, and much of her writing contains autobiographical elements, and her complicated relationship with her mother often shows up. Our next author, Jhumpa Lahiri, was born in 1967 and is still alive today, and her birth name was Nilanjana Sudeshna Lahiri, and she was born in London to Bengali parents. They later moved to Rhode Island, though, when she was very young for her father's work. Jhumpa was actually her family's nickname for her, and it kind of stuck. Her father was a university librarian, and her mother was a teacher. Her parents raised her to be proud of her Bengali culture, and they returned often to Calcutta to visit extended family. She went to Barnard College for English, then earned 3 master's degrees at Boston University before eventually getting her PhD in Renaissance Studies. So her collection of short stories, titled the same as the short story we'll be reading for this class, which is in that collection, was her debut work and also won her a Pulitzer Prize. She married a journalist, Alberto Vorvulas Bush, and they now live in Italy with their children. The immigrant experience is often a key component of her work, as well as her dual Indian-American identity. Alice Walker was born in 1944 and is still alive today. She was born in Eatonton, Georgia. She was the first African-American woman to win a Pulitzer for fiction as well. She was the youngest of 8 children born to a maiden mother and sharecropper father. At the age of 8, her brother accidentally shot her right eye with a BB gun. The family could not get to a doctor until a week later, which resulted in partial blindness that she has to this day. This incident led to a growing rift between Alice and her father, and really kind of had her turn inward, and she became a lot less outgoing. Though unfortunately she did sort of receive bullying because of the scar in her eye, which led her to depressed, suicidal thoughts. She attended segregated schools, but did graduate as valedictorian of her high school, went to Spelman College for a while, then became involved in the civil rights movement, and then received another scholarship to go to Sarah Lawrence College in New York, and she was one of few African-American students there, and one of even fewer female African-American students. She spent a year as an exchange student in Africa, later married a civil rights attorney named Melvin Leventhal in 1967. Walker had previously terminated a pregnancy, and then did lose her second child, and both incidents led to depression and the return of those suicidal thoughts she experienced as a child. She and Leventhal, though, eventually had a daughter named Rebecca, but her and Leventhal did separate in 1976. Her most famous work is The Color Purple. Alice Walker champions what she calls womanism, which is a movement that she sort of describes as being more inclusive than traditional feminism, really kind of designed to create a space for Black women and women of color to sort of feel they are included in this movement to achieve equality. Our last writer, Susan Glaspell, was born in 1876 and died in 1948. And she wore many hats in her life. She was an actor, director, theater producer, playwright, fiction writer, and journalist. She grew up in Davenport, Iowa, and she was a journalist both before and after attending Drake University in Des Moines. She turned from journalism to fiction at the age of 25. She had a rather strange love affair with a man named George Cram Cook. The two actually had an affair while he was married to his second wife, but later he divorced his second wife in order to marry Susan Glaspell. He was a theatrical director and writer and was very interested in drama, just like Glaspell. After moving to the East Coast, the two collaborated on many projects and founded the Washington Square Players and Provincetown Players. And the Provincetown Players were a very famous theatrical group because they sought to create a unique theater by staging plays written only by Americans. Her husband died in 1924 in Greece, and she later had a second relationship with another novelist and playwright, Norman Matson, which lasted until about 1932. She won a Pulitzer for one of her plays and really published in a lot of genres throughout her life and was involved in many social movements, including feminism. And she died at the age of 72 from a blood clot in the lung.